December 16th, 1944. German forces smashed through American lines in the Ardennes forest. Within 48 hours, entire divisions were surrounded or routed. Nearly 90,000 American casualties would follow. The largest and bloodiest battle the United States Army fought in World War II. But 3 weeks earlier, an American general had been standing at the Rhine River. German bunkers on the opposite bank were unmanned. The path into Germany was wide open. He begged Eisenhower for permission to cross. He was told no. His name was Jacob Devers, and the order that stopped him may have made the Battle of the Bulge inevitable. Jacob Devers was not part of the club. He hadn't grown up with Eisenhower and Bradley at West Point reunions. He wasn't invited to their poker games or their strategy sessions. But George Marshall had noticed him. In 1941, when Marshall was building the army that would win the war, he personally selected 4 generals for rapid promotion. He became one of the youngest major generals in the entire United States Army. Marshall saw something in Devers that others missed, a man who got results without needing to be the center of attention. Devers developed the Sherman tank. He oversaw creation of the M26 Pershing. He pushed through the Duck amphibious vehicle that would prove essential on D-Day. While other generals gave speeches, Devers built the machines that would win the war. By May 1943, Marshall's confidence was rewarded. Devs replaced Eisenhower as commander of the European Theater of Operations when Eisenhower moved to North Africa. The man who had replaced Eisenhower was now technically his equal, and Eisenhower never forgot it. August 15, 1944. While the world focused on Normandy, Jacob Devers launched the invasion everyone forgot. Operation Dragoon hit the beaches of southern France with 150,000 troops, 12 American divisions, and the French First Army under his 6th Army Group. The Germans expected weeks of bloody fighting along the Riviera. They got something else entirely. Devers crushed them. His forces drove inland with stunning speed. Marseille fell on August 28th. The German 19th Army disintegrated as it retreated north through the Rhine Valley. By mid-September, Devers had liberated more French territory than either Bradley or Montgomery. His casualties were a fraction of what Normandy had cost. His supply situation was better because he had captured intact ports. The 6th Army Group was the most successful Allied force in France, and almost no one back home had heard of it. By November 1944, the Allied advance had stalled almost everywhere. In the north, Montgomery was bogged down. Bradley's forces were bleeding in the Herkin Forest, suffering 33,000 casualties for gains measured in yards. The broad front strategy was grinding to a halt. But in the south, Devs kept winning. His forces captured Strasbourg on November 23rd, liberating the symbolic capital of Alsace. French soldiers wept as they raised the tricolor over a city that had been German since 1940. More importantly, Devers' lead elements had reached the Rhine River itself. American patrols crossed to the German side and found something astonishing. The Siegfried Line bunkers were empty. The fortifications that intelligence said would cost thousands of lives to breach were unmanned. The Germans had pulled their troops north to face Bradley and Montgomery. The door to Germany was standing open. All Devs needed was permission to walk through it. Des understood what he was looking at. If his forces crossed the Rhine now, in late November, they would be inside Germany before Christmas. They could wheel north and take the Siegfried Line from behind. They could cut off German forces facing Bradley and Patton. The war might end in weeks. His intelligence officers confirmed what the patrols had found. German resistance in his sector had collapsed. The 19th Army was shattered. Reinforcements were being sent north, not south. D sent urgent messages to Eisenhower's headquarters. He had the men, he had the supplies, he had the momentum, He had a clear shot into the enemy's homeland. All he needed was one word: go. He waited by the radio. The hours ticked by. The Germans were retreating. The door was open, and D was paralyzed by silence. Finally, the response came. Not a green light, but an invitation to a meeting. November 24th, 1944. The Heritage Hotel in Vittel, France. Eisenhower didn't come alone. He brought Omar Bradley, and he brought George Patton. Des walked into that room, facing the three most powerful men in the theater. 3 West Point men, 3 members of the inner circle. The meeting started professionally, but the air was thick with skepticism. Devils laid out his situation. His forces were at the Rhine. German defenses were unmanned. Patrols had confirmed minimal resistance on the opposite bank. He begged to cross. But he wasn't arguing against a map. He was arguing against a mindset. Bradley spoke first. The Rhine defenses were too formidable. Intelligence indicated strong German positions. A crossing attempt would be premature and dangerous. Devils pushed back. His patrols had found those positions empty. He had eyes on the ground. The intelligence was wrong. The argument grew heated. It lasted until the early morning hours. Eisenhower made his decision. No Rhine crossing. Devs would halt all preparations for crossing operations. Instead, the 6th Army Group would turn north to support Patton's offensive in the Saar Basin. Des was stunned. He had the opportunity of the war sitting in front of him, and he was being told to walk away from it. He argued that reinforcing success was basic military doctrine. His front was winning. Bradley's front was bleeding. Why strip resources from what was working to prop up what wasn't? Eisenhower's answer was final. The broad front strategy required coordinated advances. Des was too far ahead. He would wait for the other armies to catch up. Des walked out of the Heritage Hotel into the cold November night. He knew something had broken in that room. Not just his offensive, but the illusion that this war was being fought on merit alone. He had handed them victory on a platter, and they had handed him a stop order. That night he wrote in his diary words that revealed his isolation. He felt as if he didn't belong to the same team. Des was right. He didn't belong to the same team. Eisenhower and Bradley had been classmates at West Point, class of 1915. They had spent decades building relationships, sharing commands, protecting each other's careers. Patton, class of 1909, had been part of their circle since the interwar years. They trusted each other. They covered for each other's mistakes. They ensured each other got credit and resources. Des was class of 1909, same as Patton, but he had never been part of the network. He had built his career on competence, not connections. Marshall had promoted him. The West Point clique had not. Years later, officers who served under Eisenhower would admit what everyone knew at the time. Eisenhower disliked Devers. He would have fired him if he could. Only Marshall's protection kept Devers in command. The order came down. Devers would clear the Kalmar Pocket instead of crossing the Rhine. The Kalmar Pocket was a German salient west of the Rhine in Alsace. Eliminating it would straighten the Allied line. It was a sensible secondary objective, but it wasn't the Rhine. Des turned his forces away from the undefended heart of Germany. He began methodical operations against dug-in German positions, in terrain that favored the defender. The momentum died in the frozen fields of Alsace. His soldiers, who had been sprinting toward victory, were now ordered to bleed for ground that didn't matter. They traded a race for glory for a war of attrition. And 200 meters to the north, German commanders noticed something important. The pressure on their southern flank had stopped. German intelligence tracked Allied movements obsessively. They had watched Devers advance with growing alarm. If the Americans crossed the Rhine in the south, the entire Western Front would collapse. Reinforcements would have to be pulled from other sectors to stop the breakthrough. Then the Americans stopped. The Rhine crossings never came. Devers turned north, toward the calmer pocket. German commanders breathed easier. The threat to their southern flank was contained. More importantly, the divisions they had been preparing to send south could now be used elsewhere. Poner units that would have defended the Rhine could be repositioned. Hitler had been planning a massive counterattack since September. An offensive through the Ardennes forest to split the Allied armies and capture Antwerp. The operation required every available tank, every spare division, every soldier who could be pulled from quiet sectors. The American halt in the south made that offensive possible. December 16, 1944, 3 weeks after the Vittel meeting, 200,000 German troops attacked through the Ardennes. They hit the weakest sector of the American line with overwhelming force. The offensive achieved complete surprise. American units that had been resting in what they thought was a quiet sector found themselves facing Poner divisions. Some of those panzer divisions had originally been positioned to defend against a Rhine crossing in the south. The German plan was audacious, and because of the halt in the south, they now had the manpower to execute it. It almost worked. The Battle of the Bulge became a nightmare, measured in frozen bodies. American forces fought desperately to slow the German advance. The 101st Airborne was surrounded at Bastogne and refused to surrender. Units that broke reformed and fought again. Individual soldiers held crossroads against tank columns. The fighting lasted 6 weeks. When it ended, 19,000 Americans were dead. Another 47,000 were wounded. 23,000 were captured or missing. The casualty lists were longer than any other battle the U.S. fought in the war. Every frozen foxhole, every telegram sent home was a bill paid for a decision made in a warm hotel room in Vittel. But the tragedy isn't just that the battle happened. It's that the door to stop it had been standing open. Brigadier General Garrison Davidson served as the 7th Army's chief engineer. He was there when Devs reached the Rhine. He saw the empty bunkers. He knew what the opportunity meant. Years later, Davidson wrote his assessment. Perhaps success would have eliminated any possibility of the Battle of the Bulge. 40,000 casualties there could have been avoided, and the war shortened by a number of months. He wasn't speculating. He was calculating. If Devers crosses the Rhine in late November, German forces face an invasion of their homeland. Hitler cannot launch his Ardennes offensive because he needs those divisions to defend the fatherland. The Bulge never happens. 19,000 Americans don't die in the snow. The war ends months earlier. Instead, the Rhine wasn't crossed until March 1945, 4 months after Devers stood ready to do it in November. The November 24th meeting at Vittel does not appear in official histories. Eisenhower's memoir, Crusade in Europe, mentions only the orders given. It does not mention the meeting. It does not mention Devers arguing for a crossing. It does not mention the heated argument that lasted until morning. Bradley's memoirs don't mention it at all. The only record comes from Devers' personal diary and notes from his aides. Charles Whiting documented the omission in his book, Death on a Distant Frontier, suggesting the eraser was deliberate. Why omit a meeting that decided the course of the war? A commander who had the chance to end the war early. A decision that chose caution over opportunity. A political calculation that cost tens of thousands of lives. George Marshall never forgot what Jacob Devers accomplished. On March 8, 1945, Marshall promoted Devers to 4-star general. 4 days later, he promoted Bradley to the same rank. The sequence was not accidental. Marshall promoted Devers first. The man Eisenhower wanted to fire. The outsider who didn't belong to the team. The general who liberated more of France than anyone. And then watched his crossing can be cancelled for political reasons. Marshall made sure history recorded who he thought deserved recognition. Dez went on to capture Stuttgart, Nuremberg, Munich, and Berchtesgaden. His forces liberated Dhaka. They seized Hitler's Eagle's Nest, but he never got credit. The histories focused on Patton's dash and Montgomery's caution. Dez remained the forgotten four-star, the man who almost ended the war early and was stopped by his own side. The Battle of the Bulge didn't have to happen. The door to Germany was open, and the general who could have walked through it and perhaps saved 19,000 of his countrymen was ordered to stand down.